Yeah, there's another key word for me that I thought Marianne might mention, which is responsibility. And I mean, years ago, I made the decision to have children. And it's very easy to be familiar with that decision because you have your child there in front of you. But I realize now it's actually to be responsible for the future of the human race. And you don't have to be a parent to do that. In fact, I think the chivalric stance of choosing the qualities in life you want to be at play, it's to become responsible for that and be champion for that in oneself. And the beauty of it is that I see that different energies become available when one chooses to champion such a thing. I mean, in parenthood, I don't think it would be possible to do it with just the normal energies. It's such a demanding task. But in choosing to be responsible for some aspect that you would want in the world and taking that on in yourself, it summons higher fuels that also want those things in the world. So, and it's almost in looking out, certainly in this country, well, those who are in control, responsibility is absent.
And in a way, you are proposing, Nigel, that when one chooses to become responsible for something, that can be an ecology, or that can be a cause, or that can be a quality that you choose to cultivate as part of living. You're offering in the consideration that that's another way of parenthood, parenting to a cause, parenting to a quality, parenting to something that we deem important. And you're proposing that there is something chivalrous about that, about choosing to stand for something, protect something, to care for something because it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I can see one of the ways of our world is it likes to cause people to be in survival mode. And in that place, I don't think it is possible to reason and be responsible for something else. So it's, firstly, there's that personal stance of maintaining oneself in the living rather than in the survival mode, which is almost like the childlike state. So maybe chivalry is just an adult responsibility.
So transcending subsistence and survival is itself chivalrous. To engage with a greater potential of what your life can choose to support, that there is something chivalrous about that. What else, anybody please, if you were to try to build on where we are in the conversation and sense into what could it mean to be chivalrous today into your life and the opportunities of being alive at this time of change and challenge. What else you'd highlight? Please, Jerry.
I'd like to bring in, really as a kind of an analogy, really, a story of a part of my professional life. And I'm now retired, by the way, so that's all behind me. Now, the area of my work, just to fill that out a little, was in the inspection side of the construction industry. And the job function was to ensure that buildings went up, not just in a safe manner, but that the finished product was safe for people to live in, work in, whatever. And I became a team leader, and with roughly 8 professional surveyors in the team. Now, I saw, as part of my function as a team leader, to ensure that they were secure in their own function. And by that I mean that not only did they have a good understanding of the regulation that goes with construction, but also how to implement that and how to work with, you know, the builders and the engineers and the architects and so on and so on. And I now realise that in taking that stance, it was actually within, well, it was an act of chivalry towards those team members, because that is the way I now see it, is that it's an education, really, in educating these mostly men, but ladies as well, you know, sort of in educating them in the ways, if I could put it that way, of the function, was to bring them, elevate them up as human beings. So they became more secure in themselves, they became more confident. And what I found that grew out of that, at least for those who could or chose to respond, not all did, I have to say, but for those that made that decision to take on board what I was trying to educate with, it reflected outwards in that the reputation of this team became quite special, actually. And it seems to me that if one should choose, as I certainly have, to take on board what I believe to be relevant in this modern time, we have to take account of that. Yeah. And also we have to exercise, what's the word here? Being careful. Yeah. So to take a slightly silly example, there's no point in going up to a back street in some inner city town where the lighting is dim and finding a gang and trying to educate them in the ways of chivalry. Ain't going to happen. It's not, you know, sort of, in fact, you're more likely to get mugged. So you have to be, in this modern world, aware. Not everybody either can or will accept. And in the education, it's not going to be necessarily, you know, be having a conversation with somebody in these areas. It's by this life, me, enacting it, just being courageous or exhibiting loyalty or whatever it may be. Because one thing I found out that, you know, sort of, chivalry just goes everywhere. It absolutely goes everywhere. It really, really does, which is, well, that's wonderful for me. You know,
so 3 thoughts about what you offer there, Jerry. First is the recognition that it is a personal choice. Each person, in that sense, as Nigel earlier said, is free to exercise their consciousness and their choice, and thereby make the higher choices of living. The second awareness, with whatever comment about this situation or that gang or another situation, I suppose we have the permission to not write anybody out. And I know that's not what you were suggesting, but that there will be certain circumstances where one would have to become so much more courageous, so much more chivalrous to step back from the conditions around them and actually stand for themselves to choose something else. And thirdly, the beauty of your little story about your team, perhaps offering us another definition for what chivalrous is. Because the essence of the story is that the proposal you make is to be chivalrous, is to elevate the other. And to elevate the other such that we can all be elevated. That's chivalrous. Anybody else, before we bring this to land on what chivalrous could mean for us at this time? Though this is a good holding place to consider that to be chivalrous is to elevate the other and thereby to elevate the potential and the possibility for all of us. Any other contribution before we bring this to a temporary pause before we pick it up again? Yes, Sus, and then Jeremy, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking about a backdrop to this whole conversation that has been taking place. And the backdrop that I'm thinking about is also stemming out of Jerry's focus on education, because one of the things I've never understood why I was not taught is that life changes. I would really love to put that in as a backdrop, because the concept of change is going through everything, and there's something that is not understood about change, because it would appear that we all try to stop life when crises happen in life. We try to find the stop button, and then we release the stop button the moment the crisis is over. But there's going to be crisis after crisis in life. And I never understood, why have I not been taught in school that life is a process of change from the moment you are born to the moment you die, and what the consequence of your life will be inside the framework of change. So if I can put that in as a backdrop, I would really love to put that in. Yeah,
wonderful. That is actually a placeholder for a whole other exploration about every domain you framed life as a process of change. And why is it not part of education? How can it be part of education? What's a way to sense into the different levels of resilience through change? So this is something we ought to come back to on a whole separate call by itself. Jeremy, you were going to come in and maybe bring us home for today.
Yes, thank you. This was something that appeared today that I was considering, and it's to do with one of the lines that has come up today relating to service. And quite simply, what struck me was the difference, although quite subtle, the difference on the one hand between thinking about me, my life. What is it that I would want? What is it that I desire? What is it that I'm after? What is it that I seek? And then just sort of turning that slightly and looking at it slightly differently and thinking about the idea of what are the needs of my life and how can I provide service to those needs? And how can I provide opportunities for the needs of my life also? Because I think that also really has something to say about chivalry, to provide opportunities for oneself for acts of service. So I would simply say that really, that small distinction, which I found really quite gripping today in my thought processes.
Thank you.
Because just to add one last thing about that feels important, is it felt like a slight shift away from being quite so personal about myself. And there's something about this chivalry in terms of the service aspect, which is a bit less personal. So that seems to be another theme inside of this, and it felt was important to make mention of it.
Well, so there is an important theme that's traveling through some of the last comments from you, Jeremy, and then also from I think Nigel, when you spoke about this sense of how much we are always, most of the time, for most people, facing the need to just defend ourselves against all that's coming our way, and how much the socioeconomic equation, even in this postmodern, perhaps especially in this postmodern world, it forces people into subsistence or needing to survive or needing to compete to thrive, whatever way you choose to state it. And how that, together with the need to somehow discover yourself in the midst of a cacophonous world, noisy world, that created a unique combination where the high price point is to become yourself, whatever that means, and that in some way we are pushed to the discovery of self, which is a novel, big, important idea as part of something else we spoke about in a different context, the journey of individuation. But that sense of transcending the self, which you have spoken to in the sense of being in service, in the sense of being in duty, in the sense of stepping into a new space to provide opportunities to oneself and to others. All those ways, different ways of transcending the lesser self or the personal self to a more the transcendent self, wherein perhaps what we are sensing and exploring today, the chivalrous path, is one of the ways to consider the transcendent self or the path to transcending oneself. So much to further and develop here, but the intent of these portals of perception conversations is more than anything to seed possibilities, to seed ideas, to seed perceptions, rather than to bring closure or definition. And if you find this conversation interesting and inspiring, then you can become part of the process. You can become part of the conversation by joining us, by becoming a member, by joining future events that we will conduct. This is all part of the sense that in this time of evolving or evolutionary change, or both, that actually, as we've just heard from the conversation today, it's not going to be done by somebody else, by the people in power, it's actually begins with the realization that we are each in power first with ourselves. Will the political system need to be transformed? Will global economies need to be transformed? Will technologies need to be transformed? Will ways of education need to be transformed? Yes, all of these realms will need to be transformed, are being transformed, hopefully, but they all need leaders in small and in large ways. And as we are exploring today in this inquiry about chivalry, the leadership of self perhaps one of the path into that is by easing the discovery and the inquiry into the idea of chivalry and living a chivalrous life. And we will come back in future conversations to further explore this idea of values and virtues and valiance, and why are they important and how can they play a part of this future. So join us, become part of the conversation, and looking forward to seeing you on one of our next future events. Thank you very much.